So a subject I've wanted to talk about on my channel for a very long time is the subject of 3D printing and 3D printing my own fountain pens, because I've always liked the idea of being able to design my own pens, customize the ergonomics to my hand, make it look nice and unique, and then 3D print it, rather than get a pen from a big established brand that is being designed by someone else. I've always liked the idea of using something that I've designed, make it bespoke, and make it customizable. I really do like that idea, and anyone who has watched this channel for long enough will know that I've actually gone ahead and designed my own pens before, because 2 years ago when I was in my final year of high school, I actually went ahead and chose to make a fountain pen for my design and technology major work. And this is the pen that I desperately tried to make. And what it is a retractable fountain pen. And while it does have some retractableness in it, it did take something like 9 months to flesh out the idea and then design it, only for it to sort of work. Like, it did right, but it was a little bit inconsistent. But at the end of the day, I ended up with a pen that I'd designed and made, and I think that was incredibly satisfying to use. And the way that I created this pen here was to use a metal lathe. And I think lathes are brilliant tools for making pens. If I had a lathe, I would be making pens almost every week. I think lathes are great fun, and by definition, I think they are probably the best tool to make pens from, because you're turning a piece of material on its axis like that, and you're removing material. You're always going to end up with a cylindrical object, and that's what you want for a pen. And indeed, if I wanted to design a cylindrical pen, I would easily jump on a lathe and make one, because it's actually pretty simple to go ahead and make a pen on a lathe, because there are a lot of kits that you can buy online for about $30, which will include you with all the necessary materials to make a pen, and there are huge communities of people making pens on their lathes, and a lot of the materials that they'll use will produce really beautiful pens. The only issue that I have with lathes, though, is it does limit you in the types of shapes that you can make. Pretty much the only shape you can make is a cylinder, or a cylinder with a concave or convex, edge to it. It really does limit you. In fact, even this pen that I made on the lathe had to be transferred over to a 4-axis milling machine to go ahead and manufacture some of the extra slots in it that you simply couldn't make on a lathe. And another issue that I do have as well when manufacturing this batch of pens is I don't actually have access to a lathe anymore, and in fact I don't have access to a 4-axis milling machine anymore, so that is one thing that does limit me. So when I was thinking of making a pen again, I immediately jumped on the idea of getting a 3D printer, because I've used 3D printers before. 3D printing is awesome, and I thought it would be a really great method to manufacture a custom pen for myself. So that's what I went ahead and did. I went ahead and bought a 3D printer. Now, the 3D printer is off to my right over here, but before I talk about this 3D printer, let me talk you through the methodology that I used to get this 3D printer, because it's not as straightforward as you might think, because 3D printing is sort of a blanket term for any type of manufacturing where you sort of deposit a material on a layer and then sort of build up those layers to create a 3D object. And there are several different types of methods used to 3D print objects, each with their pros and cons, and a lot of them really aren't suited to making fountain pens. The first type of 3D printing that I'll mention is FDM, or fused deposition modeling. It's pretty much the most common type of 3D printing that you will see, and there's a good reason for that. FDM 3D printing is a very robust method of 3D printing. It's very affordable, and it does a very good job. Pretty much every 3D printer that you will see is going to be FDM. In fact, I can even go to my local Officeworks and I can find FDM filaments for 3D printers, and I can even find a small range of FDM 3D printers. They are pretty much everywhere. And the way that FDM works is it gets a plastic filament, usually ABS or PLA, it melts it and then it forces it through an extrusion nozzle, and the nozzle unit moves around by the use of stepper motors and rails, and it will print a layer of plastic, and then it will move up a layer, it will print another layer of plastic on top of that, and it will build the layers one on top of each other to make a 3D printed object. FDM 3D printers are pretty much going to be good at creating most objects that most people are going to be wanting to make, because anything that is larger than, say, 2 or 3 centimeters and doesn't have a lot of detail that needs to be represented is going to be pretty good to be made on FDM 3D printers. The issue is when you want to start making objects that are very, very small, or objects that have a lot of resolution that need to be represented, FDM sort of becomes a little bit of an issue because of the way that FDM works, because you're extruding a filament and it's going to be very limited to the nozzle size and the resolution of the stepper motors. But this is something that I already knew, because 2 years ago I actually tried to go ahead and 3D print my own 3D printed fountain pen body, and the results were pretty disastrous. First of all, 3D printing it was a huge stepping stone, because I wanted to 3D print it standing up, and that was presenting a lot of issues. Most of the time the pen just wouldn't finish. A lot of the time it would stop printing here and then all of the filament would become all stringy. Other times the nozzle might hit on the pen, and as a result it would just blow the pen off the bed of the 3D printer, meaning the pen wouldn't 3D print. And even when I did get a print done on it, the resolution was pretty awful, and because I 3D printed it in layers, it was pretty weak and would easily snap. So when I went ahead and tried to print it on its side like this, I had similar issues. The biggest issue of all was, even though that I was printing this on its highest resolution setting, the resolution that I was getting from the 3D printer was bad. It really is bad. Even looking at it now, I can see a lot of missing detail, and a lot of the details are jagged, and it just looks really, really awful. So obviously when I wanted to go ahead and 3D print my own pen, I didn't use FDM. What I did was I went ahead and bought this 3D printer here. What this is the Anycubic Photon, and this is a DLP, or Digital Light Processing 3D printer, which bears almost no resemblance to an FDM 3D printer. The way this 3D printer works is it has a vat or a bath in the bottom of the 3D printer into which you pour resin. And the way that it works is the resin is very photosensitive, so when light shines into it, it cures. Now, below the bath of resin is pretty much an LCD screen, and the LCD screen will light up with the cross-section of the object that you were trying to print. And when it lights up, light will shoot into the resin, and the light wavelength is something like 405 nanometers, and it will shoot into the resin and cure it, and it will produce a layer of the 3D print. And the huge advantage to this over the FDM stuff is it's able to provide a much, much higher resolution than any FDM. Even if you replace the nozzle to make the nozzle smaller, it's far, far more accurate, which is something that I'm looking for when I'm making my 3D printed fountain pens, which is really good. The only downside is the cost side, because while FDM is cheap or very affordable, I would say DLP is a lot more expensive. The price of the 3D printer itself was over $500, and the resin is pretty expensive. If I wanted to get the cheapest resin I could find, a litre of it starts at about $80, and really high quality resin will cost over $200 a litre. So this stuff certainly isn't cheap, but it is worth it because we get such a high resolution, and I honestly cannot wait to start using this 3D printer to produce fountain pens. Just to give you an idea of the resolution of this 3D printer, I printed this cube on its axis like this. It used to have a stand, but that snapped off. I 3D printed it like this. It took about 5 or 6 hours, but it is really worth it because just looking at it, you cannot see any layer lines. The resolution on this thing is absolutely crazy. You could not 3D print something like this using FDM. The geometry of it is pretty much impossible. And that pretty much brings us to the end of the video. What we're left off here is we have a 3D printer that can produce objects at insanely high detail. We have proof that it can do so. We have a bunch of resin. You got me, I have a lot of ideas that I just want to get onto paper and then transfer into CAD, and I really want to produce a fountain pen that has a pretty unique and beautiful design, and I want to make a fountain pen that is pretty much as comfortable as it gets for me to use. I'm really excited about this project. I really hope you guys are excited too, because I'm probably going to have a lot of fun in making these pens, and hopefully I'll be doing that over the next coming weeks, maybe months. We'll wait and see. So without further ado, thank you very much for watching. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I hope you do enjoy what is to come. Thank you very much for watching.